Well, hello and welcome to the latest webinar from FlightGlobal. Today we're addressing the cargo market and looking at the opportunities for airlines in a very different world to the one that we found ourselves in at the start of the year. Rather inevitably, we're calling it freight expectations. Now, most of us are familiar with what happened when COVID-19 became a pandemic in March and much of the world locked down. It meant that up to 90% of passenger flights were suddenly grounded. And even though demand for freight fell as the economy slowed down, without the belly hold capacity normally provided by passenger jets, it meant there was a sudden catastrophic shortfall in air freight capacity, something that many airlines addressed by converting passenger cabins into instant cargo compartments, often by removing seats. Now, as the world very slowly and falteringly returns to normal, we're going to look at the freight market from two perspectives. Firstly, we're going to look at the balance between demand and supply currently and what it's likely to be for the next 6 months and beyond. Will we see a continuing market for so-called preighters, passenger aircraft converted into freighters, and specialist cargo aircraft? And secondly, we're going to look at the longer term trends in the air freight market and what opportunities there are for airlines to better exploit it. Will the disruption to global supply chains caused by the boom in online retailing change the traditional relationships between aircraft operators and consigners of cargo? So to debate these issues, I'm joined by an esteemed panel of guests. Firstly, from our sponsor, Smart Cargo, its Chief Revenue Officer, Olivier Houry. Olivier, as he will tell us later, believes many airlines are seriously downplaying the potential of the air cargo market. From the airline side, we have Tim Strauss, until recently, or still currently, Vice President of Cargo with Air Canada, but about to join Amerijet International as its CEO. So someone who will be able to give us a perspective from both a full service airline and also a specialist cargo operator. Also from the airline world is Abhi Shah, Chief Revenue Officer with Azul Brazilian Airlines, an airline that's made a real success of developing the domestic e-commerce market. Abhi, we'll be asking you in just a minute how you achieved that. And our final guest is Paul Stoddart, Chairman and Founder of European Aviation Group, a UK MRO that almost accidentally found itself as a player in the air cargo market earlier this year, and now plans to operate a fleet of former passenger Airbus A340s as adapted freighters. So just before we begin our discussion, a quick reminder on the format. We're live for the next 55 minutes or so. My colleagues, Chloe Bass and Rachel Harry from our sister publication Air Cargo News are behind the scenes, making sure that everything works as it should. And Rachel will be monitoring your questions as they come in. So Paul, let's start with you. Before I move on to our other panelists, perhaps you could briefly explain how you ended up carrying PPE on out-of-service passenger quad jets from Asia to the UK and other parts of the West at the start of this crisis.
Well, hello to everybody. It's strange, but a very tried and tested way. It was one phone call. We were sitting here with a vast number of Airbus A340s on our books, some 19 of them, really looking like we're going to face some serious problems with nothing to do with them. We got one phone call from a representative of the British NHS, and some 60 odd flights later, we've managed to, in a very short period of time, put four, as you call them, passenger to freight conversions, freighters. But the A340, we're a bit lucky because it's got a tremendous belly capacity, and we were able to take the seats out under a COVID-19 exemption. We've also moved forward to an STC now that we can carry more than just medical equipment. And longer term, obviously, We're looking to convert a number of them to pure freighters, but that'll be next year.
Thanks, Paul. We'll talk more about that later. But Tim, you went through the crisis with a national flag carrier, and now you're going to be running a specialist freight airline. What's the market looking like from where you sit, and what do you see as the outlook being for the next 6 months?
Sure. Thanks for the question, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. The next 6 months will continue to be strong, we think, for the freighter world, freight world overall. Passenger volume and aircraft are not going to return probably as fast as we all hoped they would. I work inside an passenger airline, and we dearly want the market back, but it's not coming back and probably won't in a strong way yet in the third and fourth quarter of this year, which means that bit of business still is looking for a home. So those who can operate passenger aircraft as freighters, as Paul was talking about, or who can extend their basic airline into those locations that make sense for them, will do quite well. And then, of course, the guys in the all-cargo world are in the driver's seat here for a bit longer. And we'll see how that plays out. But we certainly think, if you look over the long haul, SARS took 3 years before the industry came back to normal. The financial crisis of 2008, 9, 10 took 7 years for the industry to come back to the same level. So there's some place between those two goalposts, we think, is the number. So it's quite a while that there's going to be pressure on the freight side of the industry for capacity. So we believe that there is a short term, certainly a very good market yet to go. And longer term, it'll probably take a few years before things change back to what we used to call normal, if they ever do.
Okay, well, thanks for that. We'll come back to a lot of these issues later, but we all know about how that undersupply in air freight earlier this year was caused by that urgent need to transport PPE and other medical equipment, mostly manufactured in Asia, to the West, where it was needed at the time. But lockdown has also changed consumer behavior, driving more of us from bricks and mortar stores to e-commerce platforms. And this was particularly the case when many of us couldn't leave our houses. And that e-commerce revolution has been something that's been happening long before COVID, of course. COVID has perhaps pushed it on even more. And that's something we want to address also in this webinar. So, Abby, we said earlier that Azul had made a real success of exploiting e-commerce. Tell us a little bit about your airline's experience.
Yeah. Hi, Murdo, and thanks for the invite. So for us, our exploration into cargo logistics really was a combination of many factors. Azul is a relatively young airline, and primarily a domestic airline here in Brazil. And so we found a couple of factors come together that allowed us to enter a couple of years ago into cargo logistics. And now, we're really finding that it was a combination of smart and lucky. And so, first of all, Brazil is a very large country. It's as big as the continental US on its side. There are no alternative modes of transport. Roads are okay in just some places, terrible in most places. You have big population centers, very spread out, and an e-commerce industry very, very young, in its infancy, especially compared to the US and Western Europe and China and even India and things like that. And we had our domestic network, which over the years, we're 11 years old now, we got to 105 destinations in Brazil using a combination of ATR turboprops, Embraers, and Airbuses. And so we basically found that combining our network, the fundamental strength of Azul is its network and how broad it is and how efficient belly capacity is in terms of marginal cost, with the fact that e-commerce was struggling in Brazil because there was no 2-day delivery unless you lived in Sao Paulo, right? I mean, if you lived anywhere else, it was 7 days, 14 days. And so that was really hurting the growth of e-commerce. And so we've partnered with a lot of the big e-commerce names here in Brazil over time, and we've created a network that goes from first mile to last mile, obviously with our airplanes as the anchor in the middle and the belly space. And it's all on the back of a very, very broad domestic network, very efficient belly capacity in terms of marginal cost, and you know, lots of partnerships in terms of first mile, last mile, and now coming together with the technology of smart cargo. And so, you know, it was sort of the demographics of Brazil helped us. The strength of our network really helped put that together. And now we're, you know, just taking advantage of the growth in e-commerce. And, you know, again, I think as it's in US, it's becoming a cultural shift. It's definitely becoming a cultural shift here in Brazil, where a lot more cities and a much higher percentage of the population has access to next day, 2-day delivery. And that's just going to continue the explosion of commerce here in Brazil. So that gets us very excited. But roughly, it was a combination of our network and the demographics of Brazil.
Okay, thanks. Well, staying on that theme, Olivier, you know, most airlines carry belly freight, certainly international airlines. You know, it's a pre-COVID, it was a relatively small part of most airlines' business model, 5-10%, something like that, for a lot of airlines. What opportunity do you think that airlines are missing when it comes to freight, and particularly e-commerce?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. And thank you for the invite, Murdo, equally. That's a very great question. And I think I was listening to Abby. I think Abby and Azul are very humble in their secret sauce for success, but in reality, they also did extremely well in owning a large market share in the e-commerce industry in Brazil. To your question, Murdo, I think there is a tremendous opportunity for cargo. I mean, cargo, let's step back exactly. I mean, whether you are a passenger airline or a full cargo operator, historically for passenger airline, roughly 20% of the overall available cargo capacity was used by airline when you had a focus on cargo in the business, which means 80% of this perishable commodity, because once a flight take off, it's wasted. So 80% of the space was generally unused. And of course, I'm talking across the whole network because, yeah, there are some lanes that are fully loaded and some other lanes depending on the market. Today, as you mentioned, due to COVID, there's a significant drop in this available capacity because on average, airlines who are still operating, they're not grounded, they have cut their capacity by 80 to 85 or 90%. So there's a lot of shortage in capacity and trade is still there and we need to carry goods. So opportunities are growing and we're seeing those disproportionate part of cargo revenue compared to passenger revenue. Yes, cargo is growing, but passenger revenue are disappearing. That's the main. But I think the most important realization from an airline standpoint today is that cargo can save an airline. I mean, before COVID, the airline used cargo to just increase revenue, increase profitability, maximizing utilization of this asset, that's flying asset, by promoting, selling, and putting some cargo in the belly. Today, it is becoming an increased focus. It's becoming a true line of business. And I believe this focus is here to stay. Now, there is a tremendous opportunity. I'm pretty sure, Murdo, you're going to cover the demand part of the equation. In reality, what's happening with COVID also is an acceleration to this digitalization of the economy. I mean, you're absolutely right. If you're talking about e-commerce and retail e-commerce in a developing or, in a developed world like the US or Europe, typically the part of online retail compared to brick and mortar was not more than 10%. In some very high developed countries like the US, it was 14%, which means 14% of all retail was happening online already. 3 months after the crisis, this proportion, although some of the forecast model, are still forecasting a growth of 20%, we have seen more than doubling. I think the growth in some of the shippable product categories, whether it's fashion, electronics, or etc., is hitting 80%. In some countries like the US, a recent statistic saying that 30% of retail is happening online. So I believe in the long term, and this is probably your question, for the long term, this trend is not going to go away. People are taking habits. They're ordering online. They're feeling more and more comfortable with that. Although we will see a drop and increase in brick and mortar retail, but the proportion is important. And this presents a tremendous opportunity for airlines, including passenger airlines. Why? Because we will talk about it later as well. An e-commerce shipment is a perfect commodity for an airline. You see, it's a neat box. Typically, it's 1 to 5 kilo in weight. It's nicely packaged. It's safe. It comes from a known shipper warehouse, and it's easy to load. It's identified at the package at just per unit. You can track it and trace it. So this is a perfect shipment. I mean, it's unlike what we used to do, this big 1-ton pallets of consolidated cargo. This is something that you do not need to take seats out of the plane. I mean, you can fit this e-commerce cargo anywhere and use all the space you can have. And more importantly, and I'm gonna stop talking about it, that's my excitement, the yield associated with shipping e-commerce is 2, 3, and sometimes more higher than general cargo or even specialty cargo. So it's a very exciting opportunity for airlines.
Well, thank you for that, Olivier. I'm going to stick with the looking at the market and come to Paul. Paul, you got into this market almost as you said, as a tactical opportunity, and it was at a time when there just weren't enough planes in the sky to deliver this PPE that hospitals that we urgently needed in Europe and North America, in other countries as well. How do you see the market? A lot of that PPE now, the supply chains have stabilized. There isn't such, in a lot of countries, there isn't that demand now for PPE and medical equipment. How do you see that market stabilizing? Because you're competing with sea cargo, you're competing with cheaper forms, slower but cheaper forms of transport. So what do you see as a long-term outlook going into 2021 for the business that you're now in?
Certainly for the remainder of 2020, sadly, what we are seeing is spikes. And you correctly mentioned there that a lot of what we were carrying is now being caught up by sea freight. However, the demand for certain products, particularly gloves and masks, has been so unprecedented that the suppliers in the countries like Malaysia and Vietnam and China they can ramp their manufacturing up a little bit, but what they've told customers, in particular on the gloves, is you can only have what you had last year, pre-COVID, plus 20%. So therefore you get into a situation where it's just-in-time manufacture. And when it's just-in-time manufacture, they can't put it on the sea for 6 weeks or 4 weeks, and still some air freight is required. And we've had situations where we've been called with 24 hours notice to deliver urgent deliveries where shipping containers have been unpacked on the dock to give it back to air freight to allow it to be in the UK within 24 hours. And as you know, we were lucky enough to have the aircraft and to have the infrastructure, the AOC, the pilots and various other aspects that we could react quickly, and we did. But I also, picking up on Olivier's comments, I also see a tremendous future for passenger to freight conversions, however, with a difference. I mean, it's one thing to take the seats out, you're limited by restrictions on what else you can do. But we're looking forward to, in January, announcing a fairly exciting new innovation that is effectively a sort of a halfway house between a full freighter and a passenger aircraft that would allow us to carry roughly 450 cube, 75 tons of cargo. And a lot of it will probably be targeted at the e-commerce and the light parcel, light mail, anything that's sort of the 1 to 5 kilo range or a little bit higher, that we can very easily, and we've proven it with the PPE, we can hit the turnaround times to load the cabin. So still no freight door yet, but certainly a freight system within the aircraft. And I think there's a long-term future for that. I don't think the demand's going to go away. There will be some PPE, but I see certainly our future for a dozen, say, aircraft as lightweight freighters, but with the difference that, we can hit the turnaround times.
Stuff. Tim, let's come to you. I mean, to continue that theme, there's been a lot of talk throughout this pandemic that we're going to see an end or a reduction in global supply chains in the sort of the global village. We're going to move to much more local supply chains. What do you see as I mean, this is a big question, but this is the sort of thing I guess you have to address when you're a head of freight at Air Canada and when you're going to a specialist cargo airline. What is your outlook for, how will global trade respond to this, and how will air freight fit into that?
Sure. Well, it definitely, there'll be more nearshoring over time. I think that's just what's coming our way for geopolitical reasons, besides just the normal supply chain distribution patterns. But still, getting it to your home will be a different animal altogether, or getting it to the location where you live. You see our friends at Amazon with their ever-increasing fleet are really going from distribution center to distribution center, not direct to home like a FedEx or a UPS is doing. So there's still this imbalance based on your geography. As Abby said, the connectivity in his own country isn't that great. Well, you get enough distance and the demand is there and it's small. It definitely wants to go, but I agree with Olivier and the direction Abby is taking it. This is going to be a smaller shipment level world. It's not going to be the size of the shipments we've seen before. So I think that adaptation to the e-commerce world, the technology is now available. 5 years ago, Azul couldn't have done what they wanted to do today because the technology wasn't developed yet. The power of the computer itself and then the power of the technology around it. But that cost continues to come down. That opens the world to a lot more players in the e-commerce environment. So Olivier and Abby, I think, are on the leading edge of that with their companies. And I think others are going to trade in that environment as well. But I do think, when you talk about bringing a plant from China to Mexico or something like that, that is a multi-year task. And that alone actually creates some additional cargo. So we're a few years away from that level, I think, of significant change, but it will slowly move that direction. I came from a background where in the mid-90s, the analysts said there will only be 2 companies left, maybe 3 in the United States doing shipping cargo, FedEx, UPS, maybe one other. So Emery, Purelator, CF Air Freight, Bax Global, Kitty Hawk, Airborne Express, all disappeared. There may be a resurgence in a smaller domestic market or a different domestic market for some of those companies, those light companies that come back as things nearshore, and that distribution channel changes as well. And not just there, but elsewhere. We're doing some things with drones now to remote and smaller communities, emergency medical goods, that we think the cost will come down to the level that you can replicate a tractor trailer on the road for distribution systems. That has some interesting opportunities as well. So I think there's continued change is coming our way. It slows and then it will hit fairly fast. But I think we're a few years from the real impact of nearshoring, whatever shore you happen to be on, coming into play.
I mean, we'll see a change in the profile of aircraft offering freight. I mean, Paul, you talked about you operate converted ex-passenger A340s, but will we at the other extreme, if the e-commerce trend continues, see more specialist carriers operating local services? Abby, you operate almost, I think, entirely within Brazil. I'm coming to one of the questions from the audience here, but just asking a little bit about how you do your operation. I mean, very briefly, talk us through your fleet, and do you or anyone else see an opportunity for smaller aircraft, turboprop aircraft, coming into play as that sort of e-commerce network, that e-commerce infrastructure continues to grow?
Yeah, thanks. And so I think one of the key words here is flexibility and being able to offer a range of products. So we have a fleet actually that goes from caravans to ATRs, to Embraers, to Airbus 320s, 321s, 330s, and 330-900 Neos, right? And so Brazil is a very diverse country, like many large countries. And so you want to put the right aircraft in the right market. And the beauty of having a connected network is you can do that. So we have caravans dedicated for cargo. We have ATR quick change aircraft dedicated just for cargo. I think we have the world's first Embraer 195 adapted for cargo, where we've removed the seats. And of course, we're putting e-commerce packages on top of the seats on our A320s and our A330s. So I think that having that flexibility is very important. So if an e-commerce provider wants to access, we serve 3,000 communities in Brazil, right? All different sizes. And you want to do this in as low of a trip cost manner as possible. So you want to put the ATR where it makes sense. You want to put the caravan where it makes sense. But, we did 5 round trips to China. And of course, we used the A330-900 for that, the Neo. So I think having the fleet flexibility adds complexity to your operation, no doubt. But if it's something that you're used to, which most network carriers are pretty used to it, I think that it's a very powerful tool in being able to offer all those. So, we have A330s flying domestically, palletized cargo for customers that need that. But when you want to ship, cell phones and shoes and things like that to 3,000 cities in Brazil, you go from an A320 to an ATR, and that works really well. So it is complicated in terms of the operation, but if you're sort of used to that on a passenger basis, having connectivity between fleet types, I think it's very doable. And I find on the technology side, it's for example, in Brazil, what took us a long time to get everybody used to was just scanning, right? We call it beeps. You have to beep everything along the way. And it just took a long time to get everybody used to that. And of course, without a beep, nothing exists basically. So, there are some growing pains. And when you have such a diverse country and a diverse population and diverse levels of sophistication with technology and all those kinds of things. But certainly for us, on the passenger side and the cargo side, logistics side, fleet flexibility has been very, very powerful in offering the full range of products and services to all sorts of different customers.
Murdo, could I jump in on this a little bit?
Absolutely.
Sure, I agree with Avi completely. And I think one of the advantages a network carrier has is that we're already going to many of the smaller communities with an aircraft size of that community, but with open capacity. We use about half of any belly for luggage. The other half is always open. So if you can find the right connectivity and the schedule works for you with those communities, and they are remote communities, so the other players aren't going into them at the same pace, but you can't load the 2-ton item in there like you do on the long haul aircraft. So the e-commerce world does work in that environment. So how do you exploit that? Your own system that you really have space that's already going, whether there's cargo on it or not. So that puts you in a different area. The other side of it, I will say, is when my first day on the job at Air Canada, our CEO sat down to welcome me and let me know that we would never fly freighters, which is an interesting comment at this point in time. And I just made the comment back to him. I said, the 777's a freighter with people on top. We just moved 57 tons on a 777 the other day. That's a large load. And so it plays both ways, and you can use that aircraft in the downtime from the passenger side, get an extra turn that drives down your unit cost, and still gives you some large scale, long haul connectivity. So I think airlines will rethink this. And in our airline, we were about 4% of the revenue of the company pre-COVID. Coming out, I think we'll be 12 to 15% as we grow. And as the other side shrinks a little, we grow a little bit. And I think when you get to 10, 15% of the revenue, you've got a pretty big seat at the table for all decision-making and discussions. I think that's a significant change in the airline industry around the globe, potentially at least.
That's, I mean, following up on your comment there about a 777 being affreighted with some passengers on the top. Olivier, I'm going to come to a question that we've got from our audience from David Hoppin. I'm going to paraphrase it slightly because it ties into exactly what Tim was saying there about. We all know that airlines, particularly long haul airlines, for them the holy grail is the premium passenger, the passenger paying thousands of dollars, or the corporations paying for their executives to travel. In terms of yield and profitability, the question here is, yes, e-commerce is fast growing, but how profitable is it? And when you've got companies like Amazon dominating the market and with a lot of control over the pricing and the market, how profitable is moving into e-commerce for airlines, compared to the old business of carrying lucrative passengers?
It's a very good question, actually. I mean, it is not hard to imagine with the explosion of e-commerce. I mean, people talk about Amazon and Amazon Air Prime, and they have already invested in 70 aircraft and they fly. But also, people don't realize that they had already that capacity to kind of serve their own needs before they grew by 40% in the last 3 months. So what they needed, you cannot just keep growing as fast. Even in Amazon, with their end-to-end, door-to-door delivery and even air assets, they are buying from the market capacity and services, transportation solutions, to cover roughly 50% of their business. And if we're talking only about Amazon, imagine, I mean, just make a reference to Brazil, for example, and Azul. Azul is connected to 350 different websites, online retailers in Brazil. So yes, there are major players like, Mercado Libre in Brazil is the equivalent of, it's much bigger than Amazon. It's an e-commerce marketplace, but they have already also 350 others. And this electronic connectivity drives the volume that you need to operate in a much more cost-effective way. So yes, to the question, is e-commerce profitable or is it worth moving in? The reality, when a cargo industry in general is growing at 4 or 5% year over year, in a perfect cycle, e-commerce is growing at 20%. And in some countries, growing much faster. So yes, you are going to get a lot more volume. Now, some airlines have, like Azul, and Abby mentioned it, know how to leverage their assets, the flexibility of their asset. They can fly and land on a strip land in the Amazon with an ATR. But the ability to leverage this network make it, and I am personally a very strong believer that for long distance, I think an aircraft is not only more profitable to operate than a truck. I believe we're going to get there into the mid and short distances as well. Which means even if you're flying for what is typically a trucking lane that could be service overnight, which is 10 to 12 hours of trucking, that's 1,000 miles or 800 miles. Today, by filling an aircraft of e-commerce, because the demand is there, you can fill the aircraft, you can fly it a lot faster. It takes 45 or 1 hour, and then you can fly it back and fly it back. Now you're leveraging this asset. In the 11 hours that the truck is going from one origin to a destination, you can accomplish three round trip. And then you reach economies of scales that are not only good for the airline, but you are fulfilling what is the e-commerce industry is asking for. The most important thing is speed. And today, when you order online, everybody orders online. My expectation, yeah, it was morphed by Amazon, is for now for same day delivery, next day delivery, 2-day delivery. I cancel order when I go online if they offer me 5 days or 7 days. I'm not interested. I don't want to wait anymore. And this is the leverage of air assets. And airlines today who have this air asset, which is the most expensive piece of assets, can, due to technology, as Tim mentioned, deploy with third-party players and partners, can complete the end-to-end logistics and provide to their end shippers what we call fully integrated transportation solutions that can really fulfill from what we call the shopping cart, the minute you order something online, to your doorsteps. Today, Azul in Brazil, Abby, allow me to say that, that's exactly what they do. They go pick up e-commerce product from fulfillment centers and warehouse of e-commerce player and deliver it to the door of the end consumer. Yes, this is typical business for UPS, FedEx, DHL, integrated logistics companies. Today, Azul is doing it in Brazil, and we're seeing opportunities for all airlines. If you have a good network and you're sitting on interesting lane, and you can bring this electronic connectivity directly to the e-commerce player, because that is the name of the game. They don't care about your standards and what you're shipping on an airplane, how you're shipping it, and dangerous goods, declaration, etc. What they care about is, when I have an order online, if you can take it, translate it, and generate an order and take care of my shipment end to end and give me the visibility back, we have a winning equation. And if you can do it at the speed of air and at the competitive cost of what helps me reduce my shipping cost, then I think it's a winning play. And this is the airline's opportunity, probably summarized too quick over this call from my perspective.
Okay, thank you for that, Olivier. I'm going to ask a question to Paul now from our audience, from Simon Hancock. Now you've done it with the A340s. He's asking, is there likely to be a market for what he calls freighter-ready aircraft? So passenger aircraft that have been modified with bigger doors and other modifications that make them effective as freighters without going through that full kind of P2F conversion. Now that's something I know you've done with the A340s. Can you, what is your, how do you feel about that, the potential for using these sort of aircraft?
Well, there is a market, because obviously we've got quite a quantity of these aircraft, so we don't need them all ourselves. And we have already had serious inquiries from other customers in countries that wish to use them. I think longer term, we are going to develop this, as I mentioned before, this halfway house where we don't put the full freight door in, but we do have the PMCs inside the aircraft. And I feel that will, where I see the industry going over certainly the next 3 to 5 years, certainly the next 2 years, is that there's going to be a need for cargo quick response, as the guys were saying. The great thing is we can get a phone call here, and subject only to slots and overflight permissions, we're on our way. And you can deliver globally very, very quickly. So there's one aspect where you need a quick response, where you need something yesterday. And then longer term, I think it is very much your Alibabas, all your various overnight freight that's coming from Amazon, or various points to where people just need to move a large amount from A to B. And we feel that we also have 737 dedicated freighters. It's another story, but I do feel that on just say point to point. So we're about to start a USA scheduled service 3 times a week in September, and it's underpinned by a particular contract that allows us to move 50 ton in the belly for a particular customer, which then allows us to pick up the ad hoc freight through our brokers, through our agents, to actually load into the cabin And we hope that that'll develop to a daily flight. We're also starting on the 6th of September, a weekly flight down to Ghana. Why Ghana? Because currently nobody's servicing from UK to Ghana, and you have various fruit and other stuff that needs to get into the UK, fresh produce. You know, we go down, it is only a weekly flight, but again, it'll probably develop. And I can see that all the way through, not just for us, but for perhaps customers that want to do what we're doing. It takes time, but it's not anywhere near the amount of time you're talking, you know, for passenger to freight conversions, because you can be talking up to a couple of years, particularly when you have to get a first one through. So I think there's a very strong demand, certainly in the short term, and I hope that it'll extend to the medium term. Okay.
Now we heard there about Amazon. Obviously, there's other big freight operators that do that sort of whole end-to-end service, the UPSs, the FedExes, and so on. I mean, I'll ask anyone to come in on this one, but we've obviously got Paul here from a sort of, if you like, a specialist, very specialist startup type cargo operator. Tim representing a big national airline, but moving to a specialist freight carrier. Abby from a more domestic airline. Who are going to be the winners in this? Which types of carriers? Where is the opportunity, and which types of carriers can win? I guess it's a bit of everybody, providing they're doing the right thing. But does anyone want to come in on that?
I think in the short term, we're all going to be winners. Yes. I mean, Abby's obviously clearly got a strong presence in Brazil and a tremendous product, and you know, obviously can cater to those customers, which will only grow. Tim's heading into, moving into more pure freight, but pure freight's only going to go from strength to strength. And from our corner, we're clearly seeing demand, very strong demand, and I think it will stay there for certainly the short to medium term.
Tim, you're obviously moving from one type of carrier to another. Have you got a view on this?
Yeah, I do actually. I think we've been through as a passenger carrier right now, we just finished our best quarter. We report numbers tomorrow morning, so I can't say what they are, but they're better than anybody else in North America in terms of percentage growth year over year, and significantly better than last year for across the board. We don't see quite that level the rest of the year, but still very strong and better than last year the rest of the year. But I think when you're looking 5 years, 7 years down the road, what matters most right now is how well financed your airline is, because this is a time that the well-financed, the people with cash on hand, can look at the business differently. So it's not just the opportunity, it's your ability to take advantage of the opportunity. So I think people like Air Canada that are extraordinarily well-financed before and after COVID can move into markets as other airlines can. So I don't mean to call that out specifically, but other airlines in similar position who have an aggressive position to take on cargo will be able to play the game a little differently than those who are just hanging on by their fingernails and unable to invest in this. And I think those that can invest will take a significant leap forward, and cargo will be an extraordinarily important bit of their business. But it takes that underlying financial stability right now to make that happen.
Abby, you're competing against obviously traditional competitors on the passenger side, but also against the specialist freight operators. How do you sort of steer a line between the two of them?
Yeah, I think having an existing passenger network, as Olivier said, really allows you to access a level of cost that a dedicated freighter cannot. Having a network that already flies between cities 9 times a day allows you to access a marginal cost that rivals a truck, even if it's 300-400 miles. And I think that's something that is still a myth. Surely, trucks are cheaper, it depends on the distance, but they're slower, right? So depending on what you're trying to achieve and, what your cutoff times are and all those kinds of things, if I have 9, 10, 11, 12 flights a day going between two on a high density route, I can access many different flights. That marginal cost is very, very attractive for the airline, and it's very attractive for the shipper, for the marketplace as well. So I think that that's something that e-commerce companies are learning that you can actually do next day delivery with an airplane accessing an existing network. For us, it's all about flexibility. When you make the leap, and we actually have 2 freighters, okay? We have 2 737-400 freighters. So we really have everything. We like to complicate our lives. But making the leap to a dedicated freighter is a leap of faith. And, you do lose some flexibility in that. So I think there is going to be that market. There is a market for freighters, palletized cargo, that needs to be under lock and key, needs to be in that shape. And I think that market is going to exist. But I would encourage anybody listening to think about maximum flexibility. How can you utilize the assets that you have, whether they're airplanes, whether they're your network, whether they are your brand, your distribution, and finally, regarding yields and things like that, you have the more value you can provide your customer, the higher your yields are going to be, right? So if you're going to ship something from an airport to an airport or a warehouse to a warehouse, you're going to get one set of yields, which are commoditized to a large extent. But now if you're going to be able to integrate first mile and last mile, and especially last mile is by far the most complicated, and have the integration with the merchant, right? The e-commerce company, then you're going to get significantly higher yields, like 3-4 times higher. And so if you are able to make that end-to-end link happen, you are going to be able to attract a different type of customer and perhaps separate yourself from just carrying cargo or carrying freight. So, I think it's flexibility is very, very important. There's going to be a market for freighters. But, as Tim said, the level of investment is high, especially when you're talking about new airplanes in a world right now where 16,000 airplanes are grounded. Somebody asking for a new airplane is really hard for any finance team to accept. And so you really have to maximize the assets that you have. And, you can slowly wade into dedicated freighters and things like that. But I would stress flexibility, and I would stress a value added is what's going to bring the yields.
Agreed.
Okay, that's fascinating. I'm going to come to Olivier with a question from our audience that very much follows on from that. We talked about competition from the e-commerce companies and the dedicated freight companies, but what about a question is from Andreas Jank. I hope I've pronounced that right. Will, as airlines move into this sort of digital networking directly with online marketplace operators, do you see this driving the traditional freight forwarders out of the market, or do you think that the forwarders will react to this increasingly direct carrier-shipper connection? What's your view on that question from our audience?
Murdo, I mean, it is ultimately the same old question we keep hearing for 30 years, in the industry. I mean, should we keep focusing on our freight forwarders? Should we disintermediate? Should we go directly to the shipper? Actually, I'm a strong believer that there is market for everybody, and definitely flexibility and adaptability is key, and that will shape the winners. But in a short term, let me assure this whole industry, when you look at the demand and how fast the demand is growing, in my opinion, in the coming 5 years horizon, everybody will thrive if they are doing the right things. There is a huge market that is exploding, an incremental market. It's not a substitution market. It's an incremental market for domestic e-commerce that is in need. There's 40% more demand that need to be carried and distributed. And I don't think we have enough capacity to do that. So that is thriving. There is a cross-border e-commerce that is definitely is going to accelerate as well. Although Tim mentioned that we are trending to more nearshoring at the horizon, yeah, I mean, this is not gonna really happen overnight. But also, in my opinion, let's not forget the COVID crisis and the economy recovery. I am a believer, yes, it will be a V shape, and this V shape, we are in a steep drop, but we will rebuild, we will reconnect, and trade is gonna grow and develop. So there is a lot of room for the traditional cargo, international trade, freighters, operator, freight forwarders. There is room for everybody in the market. And after each crisis, we've seen the cargo business booming for 3 or 4 years. So let us all surf on this wave, get ready for it. And then, well, I mean, flexibility, adaptability, connectivity, when you're tightly related to an end client and you are delivering the SLA required for that transportation solution, and they're happy and they see their shipping costs. A typical online retailer, they spend 10% of their revenue on shipping today. Any way you can help them decrease this cost, they will love you for it. And so there, in my opinion, bottom line, there's opportunity for all. And again, there's not enough capacity on the market today, so let's grab it. There is no us against them. Freight forwarder, third party, middleman, there is room for everybody. Everybody has a know-how, and they will put it to basically to the equation and try to leverage it.
Okay, well, we're moving towards injury time in our webinar, last few minutes. So I'm going to try and get a couple of questions in if I can from the audience. One is a very specialist one, so this is probably a very quick answer from whoever wants to contribute. But obviously, with e-commerce, we see perhaps an increase in smartphones and laptops and other goods that have got lithium-ion batteries or other dangerous goods. Just talk quickly about the sort of precautions that you have to take with carrying this sort of cargo. I don't know who wants to come in on that quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do real quick. Dangerous goods is a zero tolerance policy. Okay, so absolutely zero tolerance. You obviously have safeguards when you accept the product and when you in your entire logistics process, and any divergence is dealt with. Basically that partner is not your partner anymore, basically. So the answer is no tolerance whatsoever.
Okay. Anyone else want to contribute quickly on that one?
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly right. And I think the largest threat tends to be postal services who don't have the pre-screening and the known shipper content behind it. And that, whatever Avi said, just add ×5 when you're dealing with the postal service, because you don't know who the customer is ultimately.
Okay.
Good point.
Okay, I've got a quick question specifically for Tim from the audience. What is the outlook for, and I'll try and paraphrase this one a little bit, but what's the outlook for the intercontinental belly capacity share of the total air cargo capacity, given that slower growth in long-haul passenger flights and perhaps a permanent reduction in business travel? How do you see that equation sort of working, let's say, as we go into 2021? Obviously, so many things we have no idea about with vaccines and the spread of COVID, but what is your feeling?
Don't quote me next June or July on this one. I would say that the first long-haul flights are going to continue kind of like they are now to the major hubs in the world, to the Naritas, to the Paris, London, Frankfurt, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Sydney. And so that's where the lift's going to go. And then local carriage will take you to the final destination versus the long haul direct to a Marseille or something like that. And as long as it continues to funnel to those major market locations, I think the capacity may actually come back a little faster than people imagine. You won't see it in the secondary markets, but you will see it in the primary markets. And I think that's we experience that now, even today. So we think that will not be as big as an impact as you might imagine. but there'll be some intra-country or intra-regional transportation to feed those markets that will probably be a little different.
Okay, I've got another question from the audience, which is directed at Abby, and it really focuses on something that you were talking about earlier, this last mile, which is the crucial delivery to the consumer's doorstep. How would you, the question is, are there any recommendations to reduce risks in that last mile delivery? I mean, obviously, perhaps getting it to the nearest airport's the easy bit. How do you do that last bit of delivery?
Yeah, it is the most expensive because people aren't home and things like that. You have to develop a network of partners. So Azul is not in the business of driving trucks, but we have a broad partnership base of representatives that service these communities and service these cities. And you have to motivate them. You have to incentivize them. You have to follow up. Obviously, that's why the beeps are so important, right? You got to track everything. And so it's boots on the ground. It's a sort of city by city, day by day. It's the grind of the operation. It's where the rubber meets the road. And in the end, it's actually what you get paid for, is actually delivering, on time. And so, it takes time. You have hundreds and hundreds of partners in 3,000 cities, and technology helps. New things like Uber Flex, where you can scale up and scale down the last mile capacity, are very powerful. And so it's a combination of it is the operation. It's boots on the ground, lots of follow up, using technology to help you, but it takes time and it takes effort. Okay,
well, we're moving beyond injury time. The referee's about to blow the final whistle, but I'm just going to try and get one last statement from everybody. I mean, in 30 seconds, let's go round the table and just say that if we're meeting here again in 12 months' time, what is the market going to look like? What changes do you think will have happened over the past 12 months? Let's start with Olivier, and let's keep it brief as we're right on the cusp.
Oh my God, that's I don't have the same brand of crystal ball that Tim has, because he's good at it. But I would say, we are in the business of helping our client promote, sell, and operate their available cargo capacity, and by deploying integrated transportation solutions to their end clients. This is, I believe, this is going to be the trend. We're going to see more players expand beyond the air component, and try to service their clients to their need. I'm a strong believer of this opportunity, and it is going to be just driven by the growth in demand. So when you have a demand and you are able to adapt and become flexible and respond to the demand, then you can be successful. So I think we're going to see more increase in cargo role within airlines. And yeah, cargo needs to have a seat at the board. I think they've earned it. So that's going to be, in my opinion, the tremendous change. Hopefully I stayed within the 30 seconds.
Just about. Paul, very, very briefly, we're sitting here in July 2021. How's the last year been for you?
I think it'll have been good for any companies that can adapt, that can react very quickly to changing market circumstances, and that deliver a service. And I feel that the freight industry as a whole, or air freight industry in particular, is going to both hold its own and see a level of growth that sadly our passenger friends will not.
Tim, last thoughts from you?
Sure. I think passengers will be back to 70% of the volume they were carrying previously, or the systems they were running previously. E-com will continue to grow very quickly. Those with artificial intelligence and able to really leverage that will be ahead of the game. And if you have cash in the bank as an airline, you will win this game.
Thank you very much. And Abby, some final sign-off thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, I agree with the group in general. I would say that airline organizational structures will be much more integrated. I think that no route planner will have a discussion about a route without cargo, without e-commerce. I think no financial planning group will talk about anything without logistics. I think no fleet discussion will be without thinking about cargo inputs. So the more integrated your teams are, the more you're speaking one language, leveraging the brand especially, I think it's just going to be a much more integrated world.
Excellent. Well, I'm really sorry to our members of the audience whose questions we didn't get round to answering. We had a great question about cargo conversions and Boeing versus Airbus. We had a great question about airlines, will they be forced to move from scheduled freighter operations to a more tactical approach, and some others as well. So thank you for all your questions. Sorry we didn't get round to them. I'd like to thank all our panelists, our sponsor Smart Cargo and its representative Olivier, as well as our other three panelists for an incredibly stimulating discussion that we could have continued for another hour, I'm sure. I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at our next webinar, which is on the 20th of August. We'll be talking about pilots and their future. With much of the world's fleet still grounded and services coming back only sluggishly, will we ever witness another flight crew shortage? Or are we merely postponing the inevitable and with mass pilot layoffs, risking making it worse in the long term? So in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks again to all our panelists, and please stay safe and see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Murdo. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye.